It was Thanksgiving at the cabin, and I was standing by the fire when my stepmother raised her hand. The rest of them just watched, as if it was perfectly normal. Then the door swung open. My grandfather entered, calmly removing his heavy coat and folding it on a chair, his eyes scanning every face, counting the lies. "Keep the fire lit," he said. "Let everyone see the truth. Dinner had just become a trial. My name is Miranda Austin. I am 29 years old, and this was my first Thanksgiving back in Ohio in nearly 7 years." The setting was a cathedral of rustic hypocrisy, a massive log cabin rented for the occasion in Hocking Hills, just far enough from Columbus to feel isolated. Outside, the world was silent and clean. Heavy snow falling in thick, lazy curtains against the floor-to-ceiling windows, coating the surrounding hemlocks in white. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. The fireplace was an inferno, a roaring pit of hickory logs that cooked the room, making the air taste of ash. The heat baked the right side of my face, while the cold seeping from the enormous panes of glass chilled my left shoulder. I am a supply chain engineer. I spend my days identifying and eliminating friction in complex systems. I build pathways for critical goods to move from origin to destination with maximum efficiency and minimal loss. Returning here, to this room, was the least efficient move of my career. It was a system designed entirely for loss. My family was arranged around the heavy oak dining table. At its head, as always, sat my father, Dale Austin. He occupied the chair not just as a seat, but as a throne, a man defined by the position he held. To his right, my stepmother, Tanya, her diamonds winking in the firelight as she swirled a glass of dark red wine. Opposite her, my stepbrother, Brent. Brent was the centerpiece of the meal, the man of the hour, the reason for the season. My own mother, the woman whose quiet intelligence I'd inherited, had been dead for 16 years. Her photographs did not hang in this house. The air was thick with the smells of sage, browned butter, and the simmering, familiar poison of resentment. We were halfway through the meal, which meant we were in the middle of the evening's main event, the glorification of Brent. So I told the regional manager, "Flat out," Brent was saying, leaning back in his chair, "you want to move that many luxury sedans before the end of the year. You stop micromanaging my finance office. You let me run the numbers." And he listened. "Of course," Tanya cooed, her voice a sharp counterpoint to the crackling fire. "They know talent when they see it. Dale, isn't that just what you always said?" My father nodded. Beaming, he lifted his glass toward his son. "He's a natural. Tan. Always was. Even in high school football. He knew how to read the field. He sees the opening." "It's just instinct, Dad," Brent said, accepting the praise with a practiced shrug. "You either have it or you don't." It was a performance, a closed-loop system where praise was generated, distributed, and consumed by the same three people, reinforcing the hierarchy. Dale at the top, Tanya as his enforcer, Brent as the heir. And me? I was the audience, or perhaps the ghost at the feast, a reminder of a previous, less convenient configuration. I had been quiet for too long, focusing on separating the peas on my plate from the mashed potatoes. My silence drew Tanya's attention, as it was designed to do. "Miranda, darling," she said, her voice sliding across the table. "You're awfully quiet over there by the fire. Is our conversation too simple for you? I know you're used to, well, whatever it is you do." I kept my eyes on my plate. "It's fine, Tanya." "Oh, I'm sure it's fine. But your job, it just sounds so dreary, logistics." She pronounced the word as if it tasted bad. "Moving boxes from one place to another, all that driving around in trucks, it seems rather blue-collar for someone who went to that fancy technical college." "I designed the systems that move the trucks. Tanya," I said, my voice flat. "Mostly medical and pharmaceutical supplies. It's not blue-collar. It's code and data analysis." Right, Brent chimed in. She's a supply chain engineer. Sounds like you're just a very expensive dispatcher. Mir, hope they're paying you well for all that. Sitting. She abandoned her family for it, Tanya added, the sweetness in her voice now curdling into something sharp. Left Ohio, left her father, all to go play with computers in Colorado. Some people just don't understand loyalty. This was the real attack, the accusation of abandonment. It was a good opportunity, I said, finally looking up. An opportunity? Dale spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with paternal disappointment. An opportunity is here, with your family. We have a perfectly good life here. This, chasing you do, it's destabilizing. You fly all over the country, but you haven't been in this house for Thanksgiving in, 6, 7 years? It's embarrassing. It's a career, Dad, not chasing. Then came the punchline. Brent leaned forward, smiling. I just don't get it. You work that hard. You move all the way out to Denver. And for what? So you can live in some tiny one-bedroom apartment and eat takeout? Seems like a lonely way to live, just to prove a point. It wasn't a question, it was a judgment, delivered as a joke. And as the words landed, a cruel, satisfied smile spread across Tanya's face. But it was my father's reaction that broke something. Dale looked at Brent, then at Tanya. He saw their shared amusement, their unified front, and he smiled. He smiled, lifted his wine glass in a silent toast to the joke, and took a long, slow drink. He affirmed the humiliation. He co-signed the insult. The heat from the fire on my cheek felt like a burn. The room, which had been loud with conversation, suddenly felt very still. I slowly placed my fork and knife on the plate, the silver clinking loudly against the china. I pushed my chair back, the heavy legs scraping against the wide plank floor. The sound was abrasive, violent, and it made them all stop. I stood up. My chair was set lower than the others, placed near the hearth as an afterthought. Now, standing, I was taller than they were. Actually, Brent, I said. My voice was dangerously calm. I don't live in a one-bedroom apartment. I live in a 2,400-square-foot loft in the Union Station North District. I own it. Bought it in cash last April. The silence stretched. Brent's smile froze and chipped at the edges. Tanya's eyes narrowed. And my dispatching job, I continued, turning my gaze to her, is my company, Threadline Flow. I built it from nothing. I'm the founder and the chief systems architect. We optimize high-risk supply chains. Last quarter, we closed a round of funding that values the company at $93 million. I let that number hang in the smoky air. I didn't come back here to be insulted, I said, my voice hardening. I came back because Dad said it was system critical. I see now that the only system here is this ritual, this need to tear me down to make Brent feel tall. Tanya shot up from her chair, her face, flushed from wine and anger, turning a deep crimson. You ungrateful little... I'm not little, Tanya. I cut her off. I'm 29, and I'm not ungrateful. I'm just finished. She moved toward me, away from the table, closing the distance between us until she stood directly in front of me, bathed in the full, flickering light of the fireplace. I could smell the Cabernet on her breath. You come into this house, she hissed, jabbing a finger toward my face, a house your father pays for, and you dare to disrespect him? You disrespect your brother? This isn't Dad's house. Tanya, it's a rental for the weekend, I stated. A simple fact. You have always been the problem, she shouted, always thinking you were smarter than us. You were selfish then, and you're selfish now. I'm self-sufficient, I corrected her. You just hate it because you can't control it. I saw her hand move before I felt it. It was a blur of motion. She grabbed my left wrist, her nails digging into the skin, yanking me slightly off balance, and with her right hand, she slapped me. It was not a small tap. It was a full, open-palmed strike, thrown with all her weight. The sound was sharp and ugly, a crack that echoed off the high wooden beams, louder than the fire. My head snapped to the side. A bright, searing pain exploded across my cheek. The shock wasn't the pain itself, it was the audacity, the sheer, naked violence of it, the absolute certainty in her eyes that she was allowed to do this, and that the room would absorb it. I turned my head back. Slowly. I didn't touch my face, though it was pulsing with heat. I looked at her. Then I looked past her, at the table. The scene was frozen, a perfect, horrible painting. My father, Dale, sat paralyzed, his wineglass halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide, his expression not of anger at her, but of shock at the noise. He did not move. He did not say her name. He did not say, "Don't touch my daughter." He just watched. And Brent, the man of the hour, he turned his head away. He looked down, picked up his napkin, and pretended to wipe his mouth. Physically turning his shoulder to the confrontation, he had made himself invisible. No one spoke. No one moved to intervene. In that overheated room, surrounded by the people who called themselves my family, the only sound was the hiss and pop of the burning logs. They had all seen it, and by their silence, they had all approved it. I held my gaze on my father, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to sit in the vacuum left by the violence. Tanya was still breathing hard, her hand raised slightly, as if ready to strike again. And then, the heavy front door was flung open. It didn't just open, it was thrust open, slamming against the interior wall. A blast of Arctic air and swirling snow roared into the cabin, a vortex that attacked the fire, making it gutter and smoke, and sending a blizzard of embers up the chimney. A figure stood silhouetted against the black. Stormy night. He paused there, letting the cold rush in, a physical announcement of his arrival. Then he stepped inside and shut the door with a heavy, final thud. Harlan Quinn, my mother's father. He was a tall man, straight-backed and formidable. His silver hair combed back. He wore a dark, heavy wool overcoat, the shoulders thick with snow. He didn't knock. Harlan Quinn never knocked on a door he felt he had a right to enter. The tension in the room, already at its peak, transformed. It became something colder, heavier, and far more dangerous. His eyes, my mother's eyes, swept the room in a single, comprehensive glance. He didn't need a summary. He saw it all. He saw Tanya, poised like a striking snake. He saw me, standing rigid, the bright red print of a hand already blooming on my left cheek. He saw my father, frozen at the head of the table, and he saw Brent, studying his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. Harlan moved with a deliberate, unnerving calm. He walked past Tanya, past me, directly to the fireplace. He stood in front of the flames, ignoring us all as he slowly unwound his cashmere scarf. He began to unbutton his coat, the movements economical and precise. He took the heavy coat off, folded it exactly once, and laid it with intention over the back of the empty chair near the hearth. He turned his hands over to the flames, warming them. The entire cabin was breathless. "Harlan," my father finally managed to say, his voice strained. We didn't know you were coming." Harlan didn't turn around. "That much is obvious. Dale." He rotated his hands, warming the other side. He looked into the fire, then turned his head just enough to fix his gaze on me, then on Tanya, then back to the flames. "I arrived," he said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the silence like a razor. "Just in time to hear the truth." The sting on my cheek was not a new sensation. It was just the first time the system's violence had become physical. The foundation for that slap was laid years ago, brick by identical brick, in Grove City. Our suburb was a masterwork of beige conformity. Every house on our street had the same 3-bedroom layout, the same postage stamp lawn, the same dutifully placed mailbox. It was a community built on the principle of not standing out, and inside our home, that principle was law. My father, Dale, and my stepmother, Tanya, enforced a rigid hierarchy, and the currency of that household was praise. It was a limited resource, and it was allocated exclusively to Brent. Brent was built for their system. He was loud. He was physical. He was simple. He brought home plastic and metal. Football trophies, track ribbons, a Letterman jacket. These were things my father could understand. He could hold a trophy. He could clap Brent on the shoulder pad. He could see the validation in the local paper. I brought home ideas. I brought home report cards with perfect grades, but also questions about why the curriculum was structured the way it was. I brought home a prize from the state science fair for a project on network theory. My father looked at the certificate and asked, "But where's the trophy?" In the Austin household, Brent was celebrated. I was managed. When he failed a class, he was struggling with a difficult teacher. When I aced the same class, I was making him feel bad. He was confident. I was arrogant. He was easygoing. I was thinking too much. That was the label they settled on, the one that explained away my competence. Miranda just thinks too much. It was the diagnosis for a disease they couldn't cure. This hierarchy was most perfectly displayed at the dinner table. Long after I had outgrown it, long after I was taller than Tanya, my designated seat remained the child's chair. It was an old wooden chair from a previous dining set, with shorter legs and a lower back. It didn't match. When I was 15, I sat in it. When I was 16, I sat in it. My knees uncomfortably high, my eye level lower than everyone else's. It was a physical, daily reminder of my status. I was, and would always be, the child, Brent. Meanwhile, sat opposite Dale, an adult in an adult's chair, discussing adult things like cars and sports. My attempts to join the conversation were met with polite incomprehension, as if the family dog had suddenly offered an opinion on interest rates. My real life happened in the garage. The house was Tanya's territory. It smelled of artificial cinnamon and quiet judgment. The garage was my sanctuary. It smelled of reality. It smelled of gasoline, metal filings, damp concrete, and the sharp, clean scent of electrical flux. It was a place of logic. A machine either worked or it didn't. You could diagnose the problem, find the faulty component, and fix it. It never lied. It never gaslit you. It never told you that you were thinking too much. My workbench was in the back corner, under a buzzing fluorescent light. It started with a bicycle. Brent had gotten a brand new, expensive mountain bike for his birthday. I was given the rusted frame of an old 10-speed my father had picked up at a garage sale. He told me to make do. So I did. I stripped the frame, sanded the rust, repainted it matte black. I traded chores with neighbors for parts. I spent a month taking apart and reassembling a 3-speed internal hub gear until I understood it. When I was finished, I had a machine that was faster, lighter, and more reliable than Brent's. I had built it. My father saw it. "Don't ride that next to Brent's," he said, not even looking at me. "It's flashy." I moved on. I fixed our neighbor's broken radio. I learned to solder. I bought cheap electronic kits with my allowance and built proximity sensors and simple logic boards. I was reverse engineering the world, taking it apart to see how it worked, because the human system I lived in made no sense at all. One afternoon, Dale came into the garage while I was working on a sensor module I'd designed to turn on the lights when the car pulled in. I was 14. "What is all this scrap, Miranda?" he asked, waving a hand at my neatly organized components. "It's a proximity sensor. I'm building it so the lights—" "I just don't get it," he said, cutting me off. "This isn't normal. Why can't you just read a magazine or something?" He picked up a soldering iron, then dropped it, as if it were contaminated. "Listen, I don't want Brent coming in here and seeing this mess. It makes him feel bad. You know, he's not mechanical. Just keep it down. Don't make Brent feel bad." It was the unofficial family motto. My competence was an insult to his mediocrity. My father, a man who prized success above all, was actively telling his daughter to be less successful. Tanya was the architect of the emotional landscape. She polished Dale's neglect until it looked like fatherly concern. "He's just trying to keep the peace, Miranda," she'd say, her voice syrupy. You know how boys are. Their egos are fragile. You're the smart one. You should be mature enough to understand that. Just let Brent have his moment. But Brent's moment was all of childhood. There was no space left for mine. The system of my invisibility was perfectly captured in a photograph. It was taken one Easter, when I was about 12. Dale, Tanya, and Brent were clustered in the center of the frame, pressed together, all of them smiling, radiant. Dale's hands were on Brent's shoulders. Tanya was laughing, her head tilted toward her new husband. And then there was me. I was on the far left edge of the frame, half in, half out. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was looking at them, at the perfect, sealed unit of their family. My expression was one of clear, analytical observation. I was wearing a yellow dress I hated. I was not smiling. The person holding the camera, probably my aunt, hadn't bothered to tell me to move closer, to get fully in the shot. I was an afterthought, a blurry figure at the margin. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I saw the truth. I would never be invited into the center. They would never make room. I couldn't talk my way in. I couldn't perform my way in. I couldn't earn my way in. In that moment, standing in the beige hallway of that beige house, I made a silent promise. I would not try to get into their picture. I would build my own world. I would engineer an exit. The tool for that exit arrived in a thick white envelope in April of my senior year. I had applied to a dozen universities, but I had one target, the Weston Institute of Technology, a fictional, top-tier engineering school in Massachusetts. It was the hardest to get into, and, crucially, the farthest away. I sat in the garage, on my stool, and opened it. It wasn't just an acceptance. It was the Dean's Excellence Award, a full scholarship, tuition, room, and board, all of it. They weren't just letting me in. They were paying me to come. They saw the science fair projects, the test scores, the essays on systems theory, and they hadn't told me I was thinking too much. They had called it exceptional. I held that letter. It was heavy. It was my life's work, my entire garage sanctuary, distilled into one piece of paper. It was the key. It was the demolition charge for the child's chair. I brought it to the dinner table that night. I sat on my low chair, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I waited for a pause in Brent's monologue about spring training. "I have some news," I said. The conversation stopped. All three of them looked at me. It was rare for me to interrupt. "I got my acceptance letter from Weston Institute of... from a college," I corrected myself, knowing the name meant nothing to them. "I got a full scholarship." The silence that followed was not celebratory. It was the dead, flat silence of a machine that has just been given a command it cannot compute. "Weston?" Dale said finally, frowning. "Where in the world is that?" "It's in Massachusetts," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Massachusetts," Tanya repeated, as if I'd said Siberia. She put her fork down. "Miranda, that's awfully far. That's not practical at all. The flights alone. It's a full scholarship. Tanya, it's free. They're paying for everything." "Nothing is free, Miranda," my father said, his voice taking on the familiar tone of paternal disappointment. "It's not realistic. You're 17. You can't just move all the way across the country by yourself. That's not how the real world works. You can go to Ohio State. It's a good school. You can live here." Brent snorted. "Nerd school." I looked at their faces. I saw confusion, annoyance, and in my father's eyes, something like betrayal. My success was not a victory for the family. It was a defection. It was a threat to the system. I had broken the rule. I had not only made Brent feel bad, I had demonstrably proven I was smarter than him, and I had used that intelligence to build an escape route. There was no congratulations. There was no cake. There were no photographs. The subject was changed within 5 minutes. Dale asked Brent about his plans for his summer internship at the dealership. I sat there, on my child's chair, and the last bit of hope I'd been holding. The childish belief that one day I would finally do something impressive enough to earn their approval simply evaporated. I didn't need their approval, I needed their absence. I realized, in that moment, that the scholarship was just the first part. It covered the school. It didn't cover the distance. It didn't cover the bus ticket to the airport. It didn't cover the suitcases, the bedding, the laptop I would need. They would not provide a single dollar. I had to finance my own future, and I had to finance my own escape. Weston Institute of Technology was not Grove City. There was no beige conformity. There was only the sharp, clean, beautiful brutality of intellectual competition, and I was 4 years behind everyone else. My scholarship covered the essentials of academia: tuition, a bed in a shared dorm, and a basic meal plan. It did not cover the essentials of survival. It did not cover books that cost $300, lab fees, software licenses, winter boots, or the plane ticket I'd bought with the last of my garage savings. The system in Ohio was built on emotional manipulation. The system at Weston was built on money. I understood this system. It was transparent. You either had the money or you earned it. So I became a machine. My life was stripped down to 3 functions: learn, earn, and survive. I took 3 jobs. The first was the opening shift at the campus coffee shop. My alarm went off at 3:45 a.m. By 4, I was walking through the silent, frozen dark of the campus, the only student awake. For 3 hours, I was a barista, pulling espresso shots for frantic grad students and nursing students coming off the night shift. I learned to smile, to say "have a great day," and to mean none of it. I was fueled by the smell of burnt coffee and the free pastries I was allowed to take at the end of my shift. At 7:30 a.m., I was done. I ran to my first class. Introduction to Fluid Dynamics, wiping the sticky syrup off my hands, my brain switching from latte foam to differential equations. The second job started at 3 p.m., in the shipping and receiving warehouse for the university's materials science department. This was the opposite of the coffee shop. It was physical, anonymous, and cold. I spent 4 hours 3 times a week scanning, lifting, and sorting boxes. Heavy boxes of chemicals, delicate boxes of electronics, crates of raw steel and aluminum. I learned the system from the inside. I saw the inefficiency. I saw the manifests, handwritten and inaccurate. I saw the routes the delivery carts took, illogical and overlapping. I saw the bottleneck at the receiving dock, where one slow clerk could hold up an entire afternoon of research. I saw a stupid system, and it made my teeth itch. The third job was the one that mattered. It paid the least, but it gave me access. I was a junior lab assistant in the applied robotics department. Mostly, I cleaned glassware, organized component drawers, and ran diagnostic scripts on the senior projects. But I had a key. I had a key to the lab, and I had access to the tools after hours. My life was a timetable. 4 a.m., coffee, 8 a.m., classes, 3 p.m., warehouse, 7 p.m., dinner, which was usually the leftover pastry from the morning, eaten while walking to the lab, 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., the lab. I slept in 4-hour increments. I moved out of the dorm after the first semester into a room I rented in an off-campus house. It was a converted attic space, barely large enough for a mattress and a small desk. The heating was optional. The window was drafty. I lived on instant noodles, coffee, and the 25-cent discounted bread from the bakery outlet. I kept a spreadsheet of my finances. I was running a weekly deficit of about $12. I compensated by eating less. But in the lab, I was alive. After the professors and the PhD candidates went home, the lab was mine. It was the garage, magnified by $1 million of equipment. At first, I just did my homework. But then I started to build. I was still fascinated by the physical. I learned to solder surface mount components, my hands steady under a microscope, manipulating pieces the size of a grain of sand. I built controllers, actuators, sensor arrays. But increasingly, I was drawn to the code. The problem from the warehouse haunted me. The sheer stupidity of it. I started writing algorithms, not for complex robotics, but for simple routing. How to get Box A from Dock B to Lab C in the minimum number of steps. I ran simulations on the lab computers, using data I'd memorized from the warehouse manifests. I was in the lab, just after midnight. During finals week of my sophomore year, I was running a new simulation. I'd been awake for, I thought, about 36 hours, fueled by caffeine and the half a bag of stale discount bread I'd eaten that day. I was soldering a connection on a new prototype board, a small scanner I'd designed to automate inventory counts. I leaned closer, the smell of hot flux filling my nostrils. And the world tilted. The bright white light of the magnifying lamp dissolved into a dull gray haze. The high-pitched whine of the server rack in the corner seemed to drop 3 octaves, stretching out into a low, terrifying drone. I remember thinking, I need to set the soldering iron down before I drop it. I woke up on the cold, gritty tile of the lab floor. The smell of ozone was sharp in my nose. I had no idea how long I'd been out. A minute? An hour? My first thought was not, am I okay? It was, did I break the board? I sat up too fast. The room spun violently. I managed to crawl to the desk, pull myself up, and shut down the equipment. I made it back to my attic room and collapsed. The next day, I went to the campus health clinic. I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd blacked out. A nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, took my blood pressure and ran a finger prick blood sugar test. She looked at the reading, then looked at me. When was the last time you ate a real meal, Miranda? She asked. I had bread yesterday, I said. She sighed. Your blood sugar is 48. Your blood pressure is 90/50. You are severely malnourished and profoundly exhausted. You're burning the engine with no fuel. Honey, you can't keep this up. She put a packet of crackers and a small cup of orange juice in front of me. I want you to eat this, now. I did. It tasted like heaven. You need to call home, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You need to tell your parents you're not okay. You need to ask for help. I looked up from the orange juice, the thought of calling my father, of telling him I had failed, of hearing Tanya's voice say, I told you it was impractical, of giving them the satisfaction. The weakness from the hunger was nothing compared to the profound, visceral weakness that thought inspired. I gave the nurse a smile. It was the same one I used in the coffee shop, bright, practiced, and utterly hollow. Oh, no, I said, my voice light. I'm fine. It's just finals. I just forgot to eat. Stupid, right? I'm fine. Thank you so much for the juice. She knew I was lying. I knew she knew, but she also knew she couldn't force me. I walked out of the clinic and went to the grocery store. I spent $14, my entire budget surplus for the week, on a bag of lentils, a bag of rice, and a jar of peanut butter. I would not collapse again. My mantra changed. It was no longer about inspiration. It was a command. A line of code I ran in my own head every morning when the 3:45 a.m. alarm went off. Keep going. You are a machine. The objective is graduation. Keep going. In my junior year, I got my first contract. One of my professors mentioned that a local hardware store, a small family-owned place, was losing its shirt on inventory shrinkage and bad ordering. He mentioned it as a joke, a real-world problem that was too small and messy for academics. I went to the store. I spent a day watching their system. It was the university warehouse in miniature. Paper, pencils, and guesswork. I made them a deal. I would build them an automated inventory and reordering system. I would do it for the cost of the parts, plus $500. They agreed. For 2 months, I spent my nights building it. Simple sensors on the high-value item shelves, a basic database tied into their point-of-sale system, and my algorithm, an algorithm that didn't just count. It predicted. It learned their seasonal flow. It flagged items that were selling too fast or not at all. I installed it myself over one weekend. 2 weeks later, the owner called me. He was crying. He said I had saved his business. He said his shrinkage was down 90%. He said he hadn't realized how much time he was wasting just counting. He paid me the $500, plus a $200 bonus. But the money wasn't the important part. Standing in the back room of that hardware store, watching the data flow cleanly from the shelf to the server, watching my algorithm automatically generate a purchase order that was accurate to the piece, I felt a satisfaction I had never felt just building a machine. I didn't just love machines, I loved systems. The garage was about components. The lab was about the entire, integrated, logical flow. I had found my place. I wasn't alone. In my senior capstone course, I was grouped with 2 other people who lived in the margins. Mara was a coder, a quiet, brilliant woman who saw programming as poetry. She could find a bug in 10,000 lines of code just by sensing a break in the rhythm. She, too, was on a scholarship, working 2 jobs. Eli was a data engineering grad student, a man who saw the world in spreadsheets and probability. He was socially awkward, relentlessly logical, and found my warehouse obsession fascinating. The logistics infrastructure of North America, he'd say, is a fragile, inefficient, multi-trillion-dollar catastrophe held together with duct tape and hope. It's beautiful. I showed them my hardware store project. Eli was the one who saw the potential. "This isn't an inventory tracker, Miranda," he said, pushing his glasses up. "This is a real-time heuristics engine. You've built a kernel for optimizing small to medium enterprise logistics. It scales." We decided to make it our senior project. We would build a software and hardware package for mid-sized warehouses. We presented it at a regional tech symposium. We were the only undergraduate team there. The room was full of venture capitalists and senior engineers from major logistics corporations. We showed our demo. Eli explained the data model. Mara showed the elegant, stable code. I explained the algorithm and the hardware. The first question came from a man in a $5,000 suit. "It's a very cute student toy," he said, smiling to the crowd. "But it's clear you've never seen a real loading dock. This doesn't account for union rules, hazmat protocols, or fleet breakdowns. It's not scalable." The room chuckled. I felt my face burn. We were packing up our equipment, humiliated, when a man in a worn-out polo shirt and work boots approached us. He owned a small regional chain of distribution centers. "That guy in the suit is an idiot," he said. "He manages a balance sheet. I manage trucks. Your toy, could it handle a live data feed from my Dayton warehouse? Say, for one night?" We said yes. That night, we were in the lab. He fed us his real-time data, manifests, truck locations, driver hours, fuel costs. Our little algorithm, which we'd only ever run on simulations, was now trying to route a real, functioning warehouse. It broke. It broke 3 times. The dataset was messy, full of human errors. Mara found a memory leak. Eli re-indexed the database on the fly. I had to rewrite the core algorithm to ignore the corrupted data without crashing. We worked all night, fueled by a single, massive pot of coffee. At 6 a.m., the simulation for the night's routes finally completed. It was clean. It ran. We didn't just route his cargo. Our algorithm identified 2 redundant delivery routes and rerouted a high-priority shipment, saving him an estimated 11 hours of driver overtime and preventing a critical missed delivery. Eli looked at the final report. "Well, it works." Mara was already asleep, her head on a stack of textbooks. Eli shut his laptop. I turned off the main monitor. The sun was coming up, painting the lab in a pale gray light. The 3 of us, too exhausted to even walk home, crawled under the main workbench and fell asleep on the cold tile floor, to the sound of the server fans. My graduation day was quiet. I had finished my last final, packed my few belongings from my attic room into 2 cardboard boxes. My diploma had been mailed to my campus box. I went back to my empty room. I took the diploma out of its cardboard tube. I unrolled it. Miranda Austin, Bachelor of Science in Systems Engineering, with highest honors. I tacked it to the empty beige wall. I took out my phone. It was an old, cheap model. I turned the camera around and took a picture. Just me, in my empty room, with the diploma on the wall, my own witness. I looked at the phone. It was 5 p.m. on graduation day. I had an email from my professor, congratulating me. I had a text from Mara, asking about a celebratory beer. From my family, there was nothing, no text, no call, no card, no congratulations. I looked at the picture of myself. I looked at the diploma. I had done it. I had built the exit. I had funded the distance. I turned the phone off, picked up my boxes, and walked out the door. I didn't look back. We didn't just build an exit. We built an engine. Mara, Eli, and I pooled the few $1,000s we had. We bypassed the allure of coastal tech hubs, the places where our tiny seed money would evaporate in a month. We went back to the heart of the problem. We went to Ohio. We founded Threadline Flow in a $20 a day rented office above a defunct tire shop in Dayton. The room smelled of old rubber and industrial solvent. Our furniture consisted of 3 folding tables, mismatched chairs scavenged from the curb, and a single, overworked server rack we'd built from secondhand parts. Our product was the algorithm, refined and hardened. We called it the Flow Core. It was designed specifically for the businesses everyone else ignored. The small to mid-sized warehouses, the regional distributors, the ones still running on spreadsheets and gut instinct. We didn't just offer tracking, we offered prediction, real-time truck scheduling, dynamic route optimization that adjusted for traffic and weather, and an inventory system that learned. We were solving the last-mile problem for businesses that were being crushed by the giants. The first 6 months were a brutal exercise in burning cash we didn't have. Our server crashed every Tuesday. Like clockwork, Mara would stay up all night, rewriting database queries, while Eli and I refactored the routing logic. We lived on microwaved potatoes and the kind of acidic, burnt coffee that eats through the pot. We pitched to everyone: local logistics managers, trucking companies, food distributors. The response was always the same. They'd look at the 3 of us, just kids in a crumbling office, and they'd smile politely. "It's a neat idea," they'd say, "but we've got a system that works." Their system was a 40-year-old man named Frank with a clipboard and a wall map. We were 3 weeks from having to sell the server for parts. We had exactly $412 left in our business account. The rent was due. The mood in the room was no longer defiant. It was funereal. Eli was quietly searching for data analyst jobs in Columbus. Mara was staring at a line of code, but she hadn't typed anything in an hour. Then the snow came. It wasn't just a storm. It was a systemic shock. A 100-year blizzard that shut down the entire state of Ohio for 72 hours. I-70 was a parking lot. The secondary roads were impassable. The state of emergency was declared, and the entire logistics chain for the region didn't just bend. It shattered. For us, it was just cold. Our office heating was feeble, and we were bundled in coats, discussing which of our personal laptops we'd pawn first. The call came on the second night of the storm. It was a private number. I answered. The voice on the other end was frantic. "Are you Threadline Flow? The ones who ran that test for the Dayton depot? The kids from the tech paper?" "Yes," I said, standing up, my heart suddenly hammering. "This is Mark Jennings. I'm the regional logistics head for the Mid-Ohio Pharmacy Network. We have a complete supply chain collapse. Complete. Our primary carrier system is down. We have critical deliveries, ICU antibiotics, dialysis supplies, insulin, stuck in warehouses, and we have drivers stuck in the snow. We are hours away from people dying." He took a sharp, ragged breath. "That article said you could route dynamically. Can you? Or was that just talk?" This was it, the moment. Not a simulation, not a demo, a live fire test, in the middle of a natural disaster, with lives on the line. "We can," I said, my voice clear and steady. Mara and Eli were both on their feet, watching me, their eyes wide. "I can't pay you," he said, the words rushing out. "Not right now. I have no authorization. I'm operating off the grid. But I can give you our live manifest. I have 24 drivers, some in pickup trucks, willing to try. I need you to get them from our main distribution hub in Columbus to 28 critical care pharmacies and 3 rural hospitals. Can you do it? Give us your data feed, I said. We're online now. He sent it. It was chaos, a raw data dump of inventory, addresses, and a list of drivers. The existing routes were useless. The highways were red. The back roads were black. It's not just about the clear roads, I said, thinking aloud, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. The algorithm is built to find the fastest route, but fastest is now impassable. We have to redefine optimal. We need a snow-clearing variable. We need to route based on road crew priority, not speed limits. The state DOT is publishing a live map of plowed roads, Eli said, pulling it up on his monitor. It's updating every 15 minutes. I can scrape it. I can feed it into your logic. Do it, I said. Mara, I'm going into the core. I have to rewrite the weighting. I'm going to deprioritize highway segments and build a new heuristics model based on the DOT plow status and vehicle type. That's a core rewrite, Miranda, Mara said, her voice tight. That's not a tweak. You touch that. You could break the whole engine. It's already broken, I said. It's designed for a world that doesn't exist right now. Eli, get me that feed. Mara, build a new UI for the drivers. Text-based only. Just a simple string of turn-by-turn directions we can send to their phones. For the next 36 hours, we didn't sleep. We didn't eat. The room was a pressure cooker. I pulled apart my own algorithm, the code I had spent years perfecting, and I rebuilt it from the ground up. I wrote in new logic. If road status is black, route priority is 0, regardless of distance. If vehicle type is 4YD, add a 0.5 multiplier to secondary road priority. It was the hardest work I had ever done. It was like performing surgery on my own brain. Twice. The entire system crashed. But by the 3rd hour, it was stabilizing. We started pushing the first routes. Simple. Text-based directions sent to the drivers' phones. Driver 1, dispatched, Eli said, his voice a low monotone. Columbus Hub to Chillicothe. We watched his icon crawl across our map. He was taking a bizarre, winding route through suburbs and industrial parks, but the roads were green on the DOT map. He was moving. Driver 2, dispatched, Zanesville. Driver 3, dispatched, Marysville. For the rest of the night, we were a mission control. We routed 22 drivers. We coordinated deliveries of antibiotics, anticoagulants, and respiratory meds. Our algorithm found paths they didn't know existed. It routed a pickup truck full of insulin down a service road for a salt mine because Eli's scraper saw it was plowed. At 6 a.m. on the 3rd day, the last delivery was confirmed. It's done, Eli said, slumping over his keyboard. All criticals delivered. Mara was asleep in her chair, her face resting on her arms. I just stared at the screen, at the 22 perfect, jagged lines that represented our success. We had done it. I checked my phone. It had been buzzing, but I'd ignored it. There was one text message, from Mark Jennings. It had come in about an hour ago. It wasn't a thank you. It was just 5 words. You just saved an ICU case. I read the text, then I read it again. I walked over to the frosty window, looking down at the dead street in Dayton. This wasn't a hardware store owner's gratitude. This wasn't a grade. It was a life. A person was alive because my system worked. The local Dayton paper ran a story. A student startup's snow algorithm saves local pharmacies. It was a small, human interest piece, but it got picked up by a tech aggregator. And then the suits arrived. The first seed investors showed up a week later. They weren't from Ohio. They flew in from Boston and Silicon Valley, and they looked at our cheap office with a mixture of pity and amusement. We met them in a conference room we borrowed from the bank downstairs. There were 3 of them, all men, all wearing expensive, casual clothing that cost more than our server. Impressive work, their leader said, not smiling. Very resourceful. We've reviewed your code. It's primitive, but the kernel is interesting. They made their offer. It was for $50,000, not enough to survive for 6 months. In exchange, he continued, we'll take a 60% controlling interest. And of course, our firm will assume ownership of the core intellectual property. We have the resources to scale this properly. You'll be well positioned as, say, senior project managers. I looked at him. He was calling my life's work primitive. He was offering to buy my company, my garage, my sleepless nights, my collapse on the lab floor, for $50,000 and a job title. He was trying to take my IP. I remembered my father's face when he'd told me to keep it down in the garage. I remembered the man at the symposium calling my work a student toy. No, I said. The man blinked. I don't think you understand. Miss Austen, this is a very generous offer for a pre-revenue project. I understand it perfectly, I said. Standing up, Mara and Eli stood with me. You're not investing. You're robbing us. You want to buy my algorithm for the price of a used car. The answer is no. Threadline Flow is not for sale. You'll be out of business in a month, he said, the smile finally appearing. It was cold. Then we'll be out of business in a month, I said, but we'll still own our code. They left. Eli was pale. Miranda, that was $50,000. It was a trap, Eli, I said. It was the same system. They just wanted to put us in a different kind of child's chair. 2 days later, Mark Jennings called. The Pharmacy Network's board had approved an emergency payment, $10,000 for our services during the storm, and they wanted to sign a 12-month contract to integrate our flow core into their permanent logistics system. It was our first client. We survived the winter. That contract gave us leverage. We found a different investor, an angel investor in Cincinnati, who had actually run a trucking company. She gave us $200,000 for a 15% stake. She didn't touch our IP. With that money, we had a choice. We could stay in Ohio. We could grow. But Ohio was a solved problem. Where is the hardest place to move things in this country? I asked Eli. He didn't hesitate. The Mountain West, the Rockies, the supply chains are thin. The weather is unpredictable. The distances are vast. And the destinations are remote. It's a logistical nightmare. That's where we're going, I said. If our system can work there, it can work anywhere. We moved the company to Denver, Colorado. We leased a small, functional office in an industrial park near the I-25. It was empty, just a big, concrete-floored room with a view of the mountains. Before we bought desks, before we bought servers, I took $500 from our new budget and I went to a reclaimed furniture workshop. I bought a table. It was a massive, 10-foot-long slab of reclaimed pine, set on a simple, black steel frame. It was scarred and imperfect, but it was solid. I had them deliver it and set it in the middle of the empty room. I bought 10 chairs, all of them identical. Mara, Eli, and I sat down. There was no head of the table. Every seat had the same view. Every chair was equal. This, I said, running my hand over the rough-hewn wood, is the new rule. This is our system. Everybody gets a seat. Everybody's at the same level. The only thing that matters is the work. We plugged in our laptops, and we got started. The Mountain West was not Ohio. Ohio was a grid. The Rockies were a fractal. The problem wasn't just snow. It was altitude, gradient, and isolation. A truck breaking down in Ohio meant a 4-hour delay. A truck breaking down on a high-altitude pass in Colorado in November meant a lost driver and a lost cargo. A single avalanche didn't just reroute a delivery. It cut off an entire town for a week. The big logistics carriers treated the mountains as an obstacle, a high-cost, low-profit problem to be minimized. For us, it was a data set to be solved. Our flow core thrived on this chaos. It learned the microclimates. It learned which passes required chain-ups based on real-time weather data. It learned which small-town airstrips could handle emergency medical flights. Within 2 years, Threadline Flow was no longer a scrappy startup. We were the essential nervous system for high-altitude logistics. We became the backbone for nearly 80% of the independent medical and pharmaceutical distributors across Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. We weren't just moving boxes. We were routing chemotherapy to Aspen, antibiotics to rural clinics in Wyoming, and critical blood supplies to ski-town hospitals. We were a lifeline. And success, in the tech world, brings noise. One Tuesday, an email landed in my inbox. It wasn't from a client. It was from Logis Trade Journal, the biggest trade publication in our sector. I had been named to the Summit 30 Under 30. Mara and Eli were ecstatic. They ordered champagne and pizza to the office, and we gathered around the 10-seat table. They made a toast. "To the boss," Mara said, raising her plastic cup. "To the smartest engine we know." I drank the champagne. It tasted sweet and cold, but the award felt abstract. It was external validation, and my entire life had taught me that external validation was a trap. It was the trophy Brent got for football, the thing they gave you to make you stop asking questions. But I went to the ceremony, for the team, for the company. It was in San Francisco, in a glass ballroom overlooking the bay. It was a room full of intensely optimized people, all of them networking, all of them building their personal brands. I watched them work the room, their smiles bright and efficient. It was just another system, one I found exhausting. I accepted the award. It was a heavy, stylized piece of cut glass, cold to the touch. I gave a short, precise speech about data-driven solutions and the future of rural logistics. Afterward, a journalist from a tech blog, her eyes bright, pulled me aside. "An incredible story, Miranda, really," she said. "Building a system that literally saves lives in these remote areas. From that little Ohio startup to this. What does your family think? They must be just impossibly proud of you." The question landed like a physical blow, a sudden, sharp pressure in my chest. I could see the fireplace in Hocking Hills. I could feel the ghost of Tanya's hand on my cheek. I could hear my father telling me not to make Brent feel bad. I smiled. It was the smile I had perfected at 4 a.m. behind the espresso machine, bright, professional, and entirely hollow. "They're very traditional," I said, my voice smooth. "They're not really in the tech space. They don't really follow this sector, but they're always happy to hear I'm doing well." It was a perfect, clean, corporate lie. It protected me, and it protected them from my truth. The journalist nodded, satisfied, and moved on. That night, I flew back to Denver. I walked into my loft. It was dark, the only light coming from the city skyline through the massive warehouse windows. The apartment was immaculate, furnished in a spare, functional minimalism. It was quiet, just the distant hum of the city. I took the glass award out of its box and placed it on the bookshelf. It sat there, glinting in the city light, an artifact from a world that didn't feel like mine. I had done it. I had the validation. I had the trophy. I had the loft. I had the successful company. I stood in the dark, looking at the piece of glass, and I felt nothing. It was just a heavy object. The silence of the apartment felt accusatory. I picked up my phone. I navigated to my family's text thread, the one I only ever read. I scrolled past 2 years of birthday photos for Brent, announcements about Dale's golf scores, and pictures of Tanya's new patio furniture. I opened a direct message to Brent. My thumbs hovered over the screen. What do you even say? I won an award. My company is worth millions. Do you see me now? I deleted it. I typed 5 simple words. Hope you're well. I hit send. I watched the delivered receipt appear. I stood there, watching the phone, for a long time. It never changed to read. No reply ever came. It was a signal sent into a void. 3 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Tanya. My heart did a stupid, hopeful, involuntary little jump. The subject line read, "Family News." I clicked it. The body of the email was empty. There was no "Dear Miranda." There was no "Congratulations. We saw the article about your award." There was no "We're so proud of you." It was just a single blue hyperlink. My hand was trembling slightly. I clicked the link. It took me to a Facebook post from Dale. It was a photo album. The cover photo showed Brent, grinning from ear to ear, standing in front of a shiny, jet-black luxury sports sedan with a giant red bow on the hood. The caption, written by Dale, read, "So proud of our son Brent. He's officially the top sales manager in the entire Ohio region. A real natural, just like his old man. Hard work always pays off. He earned this." I stared at the picture. I stared at the caption. Top sales manager. At the dealership my father's friend owned. Hard work pays off. That car cost more than my first year's operating budget. It was a message, a clear, precise, systemic correction. My 30 under 30 award was just a piece of glass, Brent's new car, a gift from our father disguised as a reward. That was real success. That was the achievement worthy of a family announcement. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt calibrated. I felt the old, cold logic of the garage settle back over me. I had been looking for an emotional validation from a system designed, at its core, to deny me. It was a design flaw in my own thinking. I went to the office. It was almost 8 p.m. The main floor was dark, except for the light from the conference room. My entire senior team was in there, gathered around the 10-seat table. They were eating pizza out of boxes, arguing, and sketching on the whiteboard walls. I walked in. Eli, his mouth full, looked up. "Oh, good. You're here. We've got a problem. Mara thinks our new query for the Wyoming routes is inefficient. I think it's elegant. Settle this." I sat down, in my usual chair. It was identical to theirs. I grabbed a slice of pepperoni. "The trophy looks good in the reception area," Mara said, not looking up from her laptop. "But this new data structure is a mess. Eli's join is creating a 2-second lag." I looked at them. They didn't care about my award. They didn't care about the journalist, or my speech, or the glass ballroom. They cared about the work. They saw me, not as an award winner, but as a component, a critical, respected part of the system we had all built. And I realized, sitting there, that being seen is not the same as belonging. My family had never seen me. The tech world in San Francisco saw me, but I didn't belong there. Here, at this scarred pine table, surrounded by brilliant, sleep-deprived engineers arguing about database queries. Here, I was just part of the flow. It was the closest I had ever come to belonging. The next week, another piece of mail arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a real paper envelope, addressed to me, by hand. The return address was for a small rural clinic in southern Colorado. I opened it. It was a simple, cheap greeting card with a picture of a mountain on it. Inside, in shaky blue pen, a note from the head nurse. "Ms. Austin, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I wanted to thank you. The delivery of platelet-rich plasma that your system routed to us during the April blizzard. It got here 6 hours faster than the old carrier ever could have. It saved the life of a new mother who was hemorrhaging. We are a small hospital. We don't have reserves. We just wanted to say thank you for your system." I held that flimsy card. It weighed nothing, and it was heavier, more real, than the glass trophy on my shelf. This was the why, not the valuation, not the award. This. But the company was growing, fast. We hired 15 people, then 25, and I was falling back into old habits. I was working 90-hour weeks. I was checking every line of Mara's code. I was double-checking all of Eli's data models. I was the girl in the lab again, the one who had to do it all herself, the one who would collapse on the floor. Eli found me at my desk at 2 a.m. one Wednesday. I was asleep on my keyboard, a spreadsheet of fuel costs still open on my screen. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and unplugged my monitor. "Go home, Miranda," he said. "I have to check the Western Slope manifests," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "No, you don't," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "The system is checking them. The system you designed. The team is managing the system. You are a bottleneck." That word, bottleneck, the one thing I had spent my life engineering against. You are the one inefficient component, Miranda, he said, his voice not unkind, just logical. You built this thing to run without you. You need to trust it. You need to trust us. Stop being the single point of failure. He was right. I was still that girl in the garage, thinking I had to do it all myself, in secret, because no one else would. I had to learn to trust. I had to learn to not burn myself out. The next day, I officially promoted Mara to Chief Technology Officer. I made Eli the Chief Data Officer. I took a weekend off. I bought a plant. I learned to be the architect, not the engine. And as the system stabilized, the sharks began to circle. We were efficient, we were highly profitable, and we were independent. That made the big predators nervous. The rumors started, trickling through the tech blogs. North River Logistics, one of the 3 largest freight conglomerates in North America, was sniffing around. Eli brought it up at our next team lead meeting at the 10-seat table. The rumors are getting loud. Miranda, they're going to make an offer, a big one. Let them, I said. What's our number? Mara asked, ever the pragmatist. It's not a number, I said, looking around the table at the faces of the people who had built this with me. It's a principle. If we ever sell, it's on our terms. We don't just sell the code, we sell the system. And the system includes the team. Full retention, no layoffs, and guaranteed contracts for our rural clients. We built this to protect the supply chain, not to be cannibalized by the people who broke it in the first place. Eli nodded slowly. So, we don't sell. We don't sell cheap, I corrected, a small smile touching my lips. In principles, or in price, we just have to remember exactly what we're worth. The North River acquisition rumors were reaching a peak. Our company, Threadline, was the subject of 3 different analysis articles in 1 week, and my life had become a series of low-toned strategy meetings with Eli, Mara, and our lawyers. We were operating at a new level, a place of corporate defense and 9-figure valuations. It was in the middle of this high-stakes, bloodless warfare that the old system, the original corrosive network, sent its signal. The email wasn't from Dale or Tanya. They didn't have my professional email address. This one came from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. She was a peripheral figure, a quiet woman who had long ago chosen neutrality, which, in my family, was a form of surrender. The subject line read, "A Family Thanksgiving." My mouse hovered over it for a full minute before I clicked. "Dearest Miranda," it began, her tone already pleading. "I know it has been many years, but your father and I, well, we all think it's time for a proper reunion. We've rented a beautiful cabin in Hocking Hills, a chance to reconnect. Please, Miranda, it would mean the world to all of us, especially your father." It was a trap, a lure. It was a summons disguised as an olive branch. But it was the postscript at the bottom, a short, scanned note in my father's familiar, aggressive handwriting, that confirmed it. "Miranda, come home. It's time. There is something critical we all need to discuss." Critical. That was the word he had used 7 years ago, the system critical emergency. It was the same word I use now to describe a high-priority shipment. It was a word meant to trigger an immediate, overriding response. He was attempting to use my own professional language against me, to pull me back into his emotional orbit. I forwarded the email to Mara without comment. She was at my desk 2 minutes later, holding a cup of coffee. "Hocking Hills," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "Sounds scenic and predatory." "He used the word critical," I said, staring at the screen. "It's a summons," she agreed. "They've seen your name in the press. They saw the 30 under 30. They smell money. The acquisition rumors are public. Miranda, they think you're about to cash out." So I ignore it. Mara was quiet for a moment. She, more than anyone, knew the architecture of my past. "Or," she said softly, "you go. You've built a firewall between your life and theirs for almost a decade. It's stable. It's secure. You're not the kid in the attic room anymore. You're not the one sitting in the child's chair." She paused. "You go. And you close the loop. On your terms. You're the one with the power. Now, go show them what your system looks like. Her logic was clean. It appealed to the engineer in me. Close the loop. Finalize the circuit. But it wasn't just a system. It was a wound. I was still debating, running the cost-benefit analysis in my head, when my personal phone vibrated on the desk. A text from a number I knew by heart but rarely saw. My grandfather, Harlan Quinn. It was one sentence. Let the fire burn. I stared at the words. Let the fire burn. It wasn't advice. It was a directive. It was tactical. He wasn't just telling me to go. He was telling me to let the confrontation happen. He was telling me to bring the fuel. Suddenly, the fragmented pieces of data clicked into place. My father's critical message, Harlan's cryptic text, Aunt Linda's plea. This wasn't a reunion, it was a power play. I opened my laptop and went to Brent's social media. He had never blocked me. My invisibility had always been his greatest protection. His feed was a grotesque performance of impending wealth. For the past 2 weeks, he'd been posting relentlessly. Pictures of himself at expensive steakhouses in Columbus, raising a glass of whiskey, a new, ridiculously oversized watch, and the captions. Big things happening. The next level is just around the corner. Had a great meeting with my finance team. Time to make the Austin name mean something in this town. And the most recent, just yesterday. This Thanksgiving is going to be one for the books. A real big business dinner. You'll see. Entrepreneur Family Capital. Chapter: Family Capital. Tanya's feed was even less subtle. It was a spray of new jewelry, a diamond tennis bracelet, emerald earrings. Her captions were giddy, smug, getting ready for the life-changing dinner. She'd posted, with a photo of a new designer handbag. Some people just know how to build a legacy. Dale is finally getting what he deserves. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about my success. This was about theirs. They were launching something, a business, and Brent, who couldn't balance his own checkbook, was suddenly an entrepreneur. I knew, with the chilling certainty of a tested algorithm, what was happening. They weren't just guessing about my new wealth, they were planning to use it. But the phrase family capital and Tanya's legacy, it meant something else. It meant inheritance, wills, my mother's estate. My grandfather Harlan was wealthy, but my mother had also had her own money, a small trust from her mother. It was supposed to have been mine when I turned 25. I had never seen a cent of it. I had been so focused on building my own world that I had never chased the old one. They were making a move. They were going to announce Brent's new venture, and my presence was required for the presentation. They were going to use the holiday, the manufactured warmth of family, to pressure me into signing something, a power of attorney, a release of funds, a seed investment in Brent's ridiculous fantasy. The slap on my cheek from all those years ago had just been the prelude. This was the real theft. I swiveled in my chair. "Mara," I called out. "Book me a red-eye to Columbus. Landing Wednesday night. I'll be back Friday." "You're going," she said. "I'm going." I turned to my computer. "Eli, I need you in here. We're initiating a full security lockdown." For the next 2 hours, I was an architect of defense. I printed hard copies of Threadline's articles of incorporation, our cap table, our major contracts, and our IP patents. I placed them in a leather-bound folder. I went into our system and implemented a founder lock, all administrative privileges, all wire transfer authorizations, all access to our source code. All of it was now locked, requiring a 3-person key from me, Mara, and our chief legal counsel. Nothing could be moved, nothing could be accessed, even by me, without my team's consent. I was locking myself out as much as I was locking them out. I made myself a ghost in my own machine. I was going into the field, and I was leaving no vulnerabilities behind. The red-eye flight was a dark, humming void. I didn't sleep. I just watched the digital map as we crossed the mountains I now called home, and drifted over the flat, dark grid of the plains. I landed in Columbus just after midnight. The air was different, colder, damper. It smelled of wet pavement and diesel. I rented a standard, anonymous sedan and began the drive south to Hocking Hills. The snow started an hour outside the city. It was the same thick, wet, Ohio snow I remembered. Not the light powder of the Rockies, but a heavy, suffocating blanket. The woods of Hocking Hills were dark and dense. The two-lane road, a narrow black ribbon, cut through the white. The rental's headlights cut through the swirling flakes, illuminating nothing but the next few feet of road. It felt like driving into a tunnel. I found the cabin just before 3 a.m. It was, as Aunt Linda had promised, beautiful. A massive, 3-story log structure set back from the road, with enormous windows and a wraparound porch. It was meant to look like a fortress of family warmth. It was also completely dark. My arrival was not expected tonight. I parked at the end of the long driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat. I watched the snow pile up on the windshield. I had come at the wrong time. I was too early. I leaned my head back against the seat and, for the first time in 24 hours, my system crashed. I fell asleep in the cold car, in the dark, at the foot of their driveway. I woke to the sound of a snowplow. It was morning. Bright, cold light reflected off the snow. My neck ached. My breath was a fog in the car. I had to wait. I drove to a diner in the nearby town of Logan. I sat in a vinyl booth, drank burnt coffee that tasted nothing like my 4 a.m. shifts at Weston, and I worked. I ran a full diagnostic on Threadline servers from my laptop. I answered emails. I became, for 3 hours, Miranda Austin, CEO. I put on the armor. At 4 p.m., as the sun began to dip, I drove back. The cabin was alive. Smoke billowed from the stone chimney. Every light was on, a blaze of artificial, welcoming yellow against the blue twilight. A new, obscenely large SUV, Brent's, no doubt, was parked near the door. I parked my modest sedan behind it. I took my single overnight bag from the trunk. I put the leather folder with my company's lifeblood under my arm. I took a deep breath of the freezing, smoke-scented air. Then I walked up the steps. Before I could knock, the door opened. It was Tanya. She was dressed in an expensive-looking cashmere sweater, the new emeralds dangling from her ears. Her smile was wide, bright, and utterly false. "Miranda, you made it! We were so worried," she exclaimed, pulling me into an embrace that was all sharp angles and expensive perfume. "Hello, Tanya," I said, not returning the hug. "Dale, Brent, look who's finally here." I stepped into the overwhelming heat. The fireplace was a roaring inferno, just as I'd known it would be. The entire cabin smelled of pine, roasting turkey, and the faint, acidic undertone of Tanya's wine. My father, Dale, came around the corner. He looked older, softer, but his eyes were the same, calculating. "Miranda, you came. You said it was critical, Dad." It is, he said, patting me on the shoulder, his eyes darting to the folder under my arm. "We'll get to that. Bring your bag in. Brent's here. Linda's in the kitchen." I looked around the room. The walls were covered in photographs. New photographs. Dale and Tanya on a cruise. Brent in a cap and gown from Ohio State. The three of them on a beach, smiling. Dale and Brent at a football game. There was not a single photograph of my mother. They had not just replaced her. They had erased her. The system had been debugged. All legacy code removed. "Go on, get settled," Tanya said, gesturing. "Dinner's in an hour. We're just having appetizers." She walked to the massive dining table, which was already set. "Now, let's see. Where to put you? Dale, you're at the head. Of course. Brent, you're to his right. Naturally. Linda, by me." She picked up the last place card. "And Miranda. Oh, the table is just so crowded. Why don't you take that nice, comfortable chair by the fire? You can eat there. It'll be cozier." It wasn't a chair. It was a low, upholstered stool, lower than a chair, tucked away from the table, from the conversation, from the family. It was the child's chair, reimagined in expensive leather. After 7 years, after the degree, the company, the valuation, the awards, after everything, they had, without a second thought, assigned me to the low chair by the fire. I looked at Tanya. I looked at my father, who was watching me, an anxious, expectant look on his face. "Just take the seat, Miranda. Don't make a fuss." "Of course," I said. My voice was calm, almost pleasant. "It looks very cozy." I walked over to the stool. I placed my leather folder on the hearth, next to my feet. I sat down. The stool was, as I'd expected, uncomfortably low. I was now looking up at all of them. I unzipped my bag, which I'd placed by my feet. I reached into the side pocket of my wool sweater. My fingers found the small, cold metal object. It was a digital audio recorder, one I used for high-level meetings to ensure perfect transcripts. I pressed the small button. A tiny, imperceptible red light glowed for a second, then went dark. It was active. It was listening. "Can I get you some wine, Miranda?" Tanya called, her voice bright with victory. "It's a wonderful Cabernet, very expensive." "I'll just have water," I said, settling onto the low stool. I want to have a clear head for the critical discussion. Dinner was served. For them, it was a feast laid out on the heavy oak table. For me, it was a plate balanced awkwardly on my knees, seated on the low stool by the hearth. The heat from the fire was intense, roasting my right side, while the rest of me felt the chill of the room's corners. I was an exhibit, placed by the fire for their observation. The recorder in my pocket was capturing it all. The clinking of Tanya's heavy silverware, the sound of wine being poured, and the opening monologue from my father. Dale raised his glass, a self-satisfied, patriarchal smile on his face. He didn't look at me. His focus was entirely on Brent, who was seated at his right hand, basking in the glow. "I'd like to make a toast," Dale announced to the table. "To family, of course, but also to the future, to my son, Brent." He reached over and clapped Brent on the shoulder. "I'm so proud to finally announce that Brent will be taking over, officially, as the manager of the Austin family assets. He's ready to run the show." Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, clapped politely, her expression nervous, her eyes flicking toward me. Tanya positively beamed, raising her glass. "To Brent, our new head of the family." I ate a piece of turkey. It was dry. "It's a big responsibility," Brent said, leaning back, affecting a tone of serious, executive gravity. "But Dad's right. I'm ready for it. We've got some major projects lined up. Big things for the Austin name." Dale looked around the table, his gaze sweeping right past me as if I were a piece of furniture. He was glowing with pride and wine. "It just goes to show," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Some kids just know how to make their parents proud." Tanya laughed, a high tinkling sound. "Oh, Dale, that's perfect. They just do." The laughter was aimed at me. It was a volley, fired from the main table, intended to hit its target by the fire. This was the performance. This was the critical discussion. They were anointing Brent, and I was here to be the audience to my own demotion. I set my plate down on the stone hearth. I looked up from my low seat. "That's fine, Dad," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through their shared amusement. The room went quiet. "It's good you have Brent to be proud of. It takes the pressure off." I picked up my water glass. Someone had to stay focused on the work. I'm just happy I can cover my 2 mortgages in Denver on my own. The word "two" hung in the air. The word "mortgages." Dale's smile tightened. He wasn't expecting me to speak. Tanya put her wine glass down with a sharp click. "That's not something to be proud of, Miranda," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "All that work, as you call it, all those things you own, it just leaves you all alone, so far away." She leaned in, a co-conspirator sharing a sad truth with the table. A good daughter would have known to stay close to home. A good daughter would have understood that family comes first. I think my definition of family is just different. Tanya, I said, my family is the team I built, the one where everyone has an equal chair at the table. This was a language she didn't understand. She only heard the defiance. She just doesn't get it. Mom, Brent said, shaking his head. He was playing the part of the mature, disappointed older brother. It's not about equal chairs. It's about responsibility. It's about legacy. He was using the words from his social media posts. He was reading from his own script. Someone has to be worthy of carrying the torch, Brent continued, warming to his topic. And that's what my new venture is all about. It's about seed capital. He said the words seed capital, as if he'd just learned them, rolling them around in his mouth. And I'm sure, once he sees the business plan, that even Grandpa Harlan will be happy to support the worthy part of the family. The mention of Harlan's name was a tactical error. Brent was overplaying his hand, revealing the true audience of his performance. They were planning to leverage my mother's father. I stopped. I looked at Brent. I looked at Dale. I looked at Tanya, who was watching me with a smug, reptilian stillness. They had planned this, every beat. Legacy, I repeated, tasting the word. You're talking about legacy, about family assets, about seed capital from Grandpa Harlan. That's right, Brent said, puffing out his chest. Then let's talk about it, I said, my voice dropping. The heat from the fire felt like a spotlight. What about my mother's legacy? The air in the cabin didn't just stop, it was sucked out. It was a system crash, a vacuum. Aunt Linda let out a small, terrified gasp and put her napkin to her mouth. Dale's face went white. Tanya's eyes narrowed to slits. Your mother, Tanya spat, has been gone for a very long time. Her money hasn't, I said. I stood up from the low stool. The sudden movement made them all flinch. I was no longer the child below their eye line. I was a 29-year-old woman, standing on the hearth, bathed in the light of the fire. I'm talking about the Quinn Trust, I said, my voice resonating in the heavy wood-paneled room. The one that was supposed to transfer to me on my 25th birthday, 4 years ago. Dale opened his mouth, but no sound came out. This entire dinner, I continued. This performance, Brent's venture, your new car, Tanya's new jewelry, it's all being funded by her, isn't it? You're not managing Austin family assets. You're draining my mother's... You ungrateful, selfish girl. Tanya shot up from her chair. She moved, just as she had in my memory, to intercept me, to block me. She stood between me and the table, her back to my father, her face a mask of crimson rage in the firelight. After everything we did for you, she shouted, her voice breaking with manufactured hysteria. After your father kept you, fed you, housed you, even after your mother died and left him, you dare to come in here and accuse us of theft? I supplied, my voice dangerously calm. Yes, that's exactly what I'm accusing you of. I'm not here for turkey. Tanya, I'm here for an accounting. Your mother's accounts? She shrieked, taking a step closer to me. You have no idea what you're talking about. You abandoned this family. You have no rights here. I have my mother's rights, I said. I met her gaze, unblinking. I know for a fact her accounts were never properly transferred. I'm here to tell you that I've retained counsel. I am formally requesting a full audit and the immediate transfer of all remaining assets. I never finished the sentence. Tanya lunged. It was not a shove. It was not a stumble. It was a conscious, violent, adult decision. Her hand, the one with the heavy rings, swung in a wide, fast arc. She slapped me. The sound was a sickening crack, an explosion in the dead silent room. It was louder than the fire. My head snapped to the side, the force of it sending a jolt of white-hot pain from my jaw to my temple. The taste of copper filled my mouth. She had cut the inside of my cheek with my own teeth. I turned my head back, slowly. I didn't raise my hand to my face. I just looked at her. The room was frozen. Aunt Linda was crying silently into her napkin. My father, Dale sat at the head of the table, his mouth open, his face a mask of pale, pathetic shock. He did not move. He did not speak. Brent, the new head of the family, the manager of assets, did exactly what he had done before. He looked down. He picked up his fork and stared at it. His shoulder turned away. He was a coward, frozen in amber. No one spoke. No one stood. In the overheated, silent cabin, the only sound was the loud, hungry crackling of the hickory logs in the fireplace. The fire just kept burning, illuminating the scene for no one but me. I held my gaze on Tanya. I held it on my father. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit in the rot of what they had just allowed. And then, the front door was flung open. It slammed against the wall with a bang that sounded like a gunshot. A furious, Arctic blast of wind and snow roared into the room, a physical violation of the cabin's suffocating warmth. The flames in the fireplace bent sideways, sputtering and hissing, casting wild, leaping shadows across the walls. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the black, stormy night. He stepped inside. Harlan Quinn, my mother's father. He shut the door, and the sound of the wind was cut off, leaving a silence that was even heavier than before. He was exactly as I remembered, implacable. His dark wool overcoat was dusted with snow. His silver hair was perfect. His eyes, my mother's eyes, were the color of a winter sky. He scanned the room. 1 second, that was all it took. He saw Tanya, her hand still raised, her chest heaving. He saw me, standing on the hearth, the bright red mark of her hand blooming on my face. He saw my father, paralyzed at the table. He saw Brent, staring at his silverware. He knew everything. He moved with a terrible, unhurried grace. He walked past Tanya. He walked past me. He went directly to the fireplace, as if he were the host and we were his guests. He unwound his scarf. He unbuttoned his coat. He took it off, folded it once, and laid it carefully on the same chair I'd seen him use in my memory. "Harlan," my father finally choked out. This is a surprise." Harlan ignored him. He looked at the fire, then he turned, not to my father, but to me. He looked at my cheek, and his expression, for a fraction of a second, was not anger. It was something deeper. It was a promise. He turned back to the room. He reached into his coat's inner pocket and retrieved a long, dark leather tube, the kind used for carrying blueprints or documents. He walked to the main dining table. He placed the leather tube on the polished oak with a solid, definitive thud. "Let's have a talk," Harlan said, his voice quiet, yet it filled the entire cabin. By the firelight, my father, finally jolted from his paralysis by this breach of his authority, threw his napkin down. "Harlan, you can't just barge in here. This is a family matter. It's private." Harlan turned his head, his gaze fixing my father to his chair. "The firelight," Harlan Quinn said, "doesn't play favorites." Harlan twisted the cap on the leather tube. The sound of the dry leather sliding was unnervingly loud in the sudden, dead quiet of the room. My father, Dale, remained standing by the door, his face a mottled mask of rage and confusion. Tanya was frozen, trapped between the fireplace and the table, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Brent had folded in on himself, his gaze fixed on the table, as if the wood grain held the answers. My cheek was a nova of pain. The digital recorder in my pocket, however, was silent and faithful, capturing every heavy breath, every crackle from the logs. "Dale, sit down," Harlan said. It was not a request. Dale looked from Harlan to the door, then back again. He was calculating his odds and finding none. He walked stiffly back to his chair at the head of the table and sat. Tanya, as if a string had been cut, collapsed back into her own seat. Harlan pulled a thick, rolled sheaf of documents from the tube. He spread them on the oak table, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision, pushing aside a gravy boat and a platter of half-eaten turkey. "This," he said, his finger tapping the top page, is the Quinn Trust, my daughter's trust, the one I established for her, and in the event of her death, for her daughter. He looked directly at me. The first time his gaze had softened. For you, Miranda, I am the sole executor until your 30th birthday, or until I deem a co-executor worthy. He let that fact land. Dale, I saw, was gripping the table's edge so hard his knuckles were white. It is not a complex document. Dale, Harlan continued, his voice the calm, dispassionate tone of a professor. It is built on two simple, governing principles: dignity and fairness. It stipulates that the assets are to be managed in a way that provides for the beneficiary's well-being, but also that the stewards of the trust, that would be you, Dale, as her stepfather and guardian, must conduct themselves with unimpeachable integrity. He slid the top page aside, revealing a neatly printed bank statement. Which brings us, he said, to these. He laid out a series of statements, one after another, like a losing hand of cards. Here is a transfer, Dale, from my daughter's personal asset account to a new joint account bearing your name and Tanya's, for $25,000, dated September 12th, 1999, 6 months after you married her. That was a debt, Dale sputtered. She insisted. It was for the house. A debt that was never repaid, Harlan said, not looking up. He slid another paper onto the stack. Here is another, $50,000, dated March 3rd, 2016. The date of Miranda's 25th birthday, the exact date the full trust was to transfer to her sole control, a transfer which you, as steward, blocked, citing beneficiary instability. And on that same day, you transferred this amount, coding it as family management fees. We were managing it, Tanya shrieked, finding her voice. It was our right. We were his family. We were taking care of all this. So you were, Harlan agreed, his voice dangerously mild. And your management was very creative. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small, silver USB drive. He set it on the table with a tiny metallic click. This, he said, is the item I am most interested in. It is the security footage from the bank's private client office, dated 6 months ago. It shows you, Dale, and you, Tanya, executing a signature verification for a wire transfer. He paused. A transfer for $100,000. She signed it, Tanya yelled, pointing at me. We sent her the papers. She signed it. Did you, Miranda? Harlan asked, his eyes on me. I never saw a document, I said, my voice clear. I never signed anything. My forensic analysts agree, Harlan said, his gaze snapping back to Tanya. The signature bears only a 34% probability of being authentic. It shows, and I quote, signatures of clear duress, likely tracing, and digital manipulation. The legal term is forgery. You've become very sloppy. Tanya. Dale looked like he was going to be sick. And where did that $100,000 go? Harlan continued, his pace relentless, surgical. He produced a final, folded letter, this one on the letterhead of a prominent Columbus law firm. It went here, to a newly formed LLC named B. Austin Ventures, a shell company, and it was immediately pledged as collateral. He unfolded the letter, smoothing it on the table, for a personal, high-interest business loan, a loan, Brent, that you used to secure the initial lease on a fleet of 20 luxury sedans for your new venture. He looked up, his quiet gaze landing on Brent. The head of the family was now visibly trembling. You didn't just steal my daughter's money, Dale, Harlan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You and your wife forged her name, and you, Brent, gambled her legacy on a vanity project for fast cars. All eyes turned to Brent. He was sweating profusely, his face slick and pale in the firelight. I didn't, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. I just signed. The consultants. They set up the financing. They said it was standard, a capital injection. I didn't know where. Dad handled the money part. I'm just the ideas guy." "You lie," Harlan said, not with anger, but with the flat certainty of a diagnosis. "You sat right here, not 10 minutes ago, and called it family capital. You knew every dollar." "This is outrageous." Tanya finally found her voice, fueled by pure, cornered rage. She stood up again, slamming her palms on the heavy oak table. "You come in here, into Dale's house, and you accuse his son? You accuse us? You're not family. Harlan, you're just a bitter old man who lost. You were never part of this family." Harlan looked at her. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited for her to finish, the silence stretching until her panting was the only sound. "I am the father," he said, his words precise and devastating, "of the woman you erased from the photographs on that wall." Tanya recoiled as if he had struck her. Aunt Linda let out a choked sob. My father, Dale, finally broke. The illusion of his patriarchy, his control, his entire world, shattered. He threw his chair back, the heavy wood screaming against the floor. "That's it. I'm done. Get out of my house. Harlan, this is over. Get out." He stormed toward the front door. Grabbing the handle, he pulled. It didn't open. He pulled again, rattling it furiously. "What is this? Did you—" "Arthur," Harlan called, raising his voice just slightly. A man stepped out of the shadows of the hallway that led to the kitchen. I hadn't even seen him. He was tall and thin, wearing a simple, perfectly tailored dark suit. He was a man who specialized in being invisible. He held a small, antique-looking key in his gloved hand. "Arthur locked the door on my instruction," Harlan said calmly. "This is my house," Dale roared, his face a deep, terrifying purple. "This is breaking and entering. You are holding me prisoner in my own home." "That," Harlan said, "is the final and most critical point of misunderstanding." He walked away from the table, past Tanya, and came to stand near me, by the fire. He was using the firelight, just as he said he would. "This is not your house, Dale." My father froze, his hand still on the doorknob. "This cabin," Harlan continued, "this structure, and the 120 acres of timberland it sits on, belongs to the Quinn Trust. I bought it 7 years ago, the day after you married Tanya. I felt the air leave my own lungs." He gestured to the expensive, rustic room. "I allowed you to use it, rent-free, for family gatherings, as a test of the core principles of the trust, dignity, fairness. I wanted to see if the man my daughter married had any character left once he thought he was king of his own castle." He looked at Dale with an expression of profound, academic disappointment. "You have failed." You're lying," Tanya hissed, but her voice was weak. "Oh, but I can prove it," Harlan said. "Which brings us to the addendum. Arthur, if you would." The man, Arthur, stepped forward. He was not a butler. He was not a bodyguard. He was a witness, a professional. "There was a clause added to the usage agreement, which you both signed. Dale," Harlan said. "A morals clause, if you will. It specifically states that the right to use this property, free of charge, is contingent on a safe and fair environment for all family members. It specifically, and immediately, revokes all privileges in the event of an act of adult-on-adult violence, observed or proven." He looked at Tanya, who had gone perfectly, dreadfully still. He looked at me. Then, he pointed a single, steady finger at the bright red mark on my cheek. "The slap," Harlan said, his voice ringing with finality. "The slap you delivered in front of 5 witnesses, 6, including Arthur, who saw it from the hall. That slap was not just an assault. Tanya, it was a breach of contract." He turned to the quiet man. "Arthur, the revocation is instant. The keys, if you please." Arthur, the quiet man, simply walked past my father. He walked past Tanya. He went to the kitchen counter where a set of keys hung on a decorative hook. He took them, the cabin keys. Then he walked back to my father, who was still standing, defeated, by the locked door. Arthur held out his open-gloved palm. Dale stared at the hand as if it were a snake. "Your car keys, Mr. Austin," Arthur said, his voice flat, emotionless. "The vehicles are on trust property. They need to be moved by morning." This was it, the true and total transfer of power, not just financial, but physical. My father, the patriarch, the man at the head of the table, looked at the hand. He looked at Harlan. He looked at me. Slowly, his shoulders slumped. He reached into his pocket, his hand trembling, and produced his key fob. He dropped it into Arthur's open hand. The room was utterly silent. Brent was crying, a quiet, wheezing, pathetic sound. Tanya had collapsed into her chair, her face gray, her new emeralds looking like cheap glass. My father looked like a man who had aged 40 years in 40 seconds. The fire crackled. My recorder was still running. Harlan turned, at last, to me. I was still standing on the hearth, the silent, bruised axis around which the entire room had just violently and permanently turned. His eyes were not triumphant. They were not angry. They were just clear. "Miranda," he said, his voice softer now, meant only for me. "You are the beneficiary, and you are the victim. The terms of the trust are clear. But the path forward has options. The law is on your side. What do you want to do?" I looked at them, the three people who had built a system designed to erase me. I saw my father, a weak man who had traded his daughter for a comfortable life. I saw his wife, a venomous woman who built her identity on someone else's destruction. I saw my stepbrother, a hollow, spoiled shell, a failed project. I could have destroyed them. I could have demanded prosecutions. I could have taken every cent they had, sold the cars, foreclosed on their homes. I felt the old, cold rage rise up, the girl in the garage wanting to burn it all down. But I thought of the 10-seat table in Denver. I thought of the nurse in Colorado, the one who had thanked me for the platelets. I thought of the work. "I don't want revenge," I said, and I was surprised to find my voice was perfectly steady. "I want precision." I stepped off the hearth, onto the main floor. I was on their level now, but not of them. "I want this ended," I said. "According to the law, no more games, no more family arrangements. I want the assets returned. I want the theft accounted for. I want this system shut down, permanently." Harlan Quinn studied my face. He saw the girl he knew, but he also saw the engineer I had become. He nodded. Once. "I agree," he said. "We will not seek punishment. We will simply adjust." He looked over at the terrified trio at the table. "We will balance the books." Harlan's words. "We will balance the books," hung in the air. Cold and final. The adjustment had begun. Arthur, the quiet man in the dark suit, moved with silent efficiency. He walked to the front door, the key he had taken from Dale in his hand, and unlocked it. He opened the door not to the howling wind, but to a woman standing patiently on the porch, as if she had been waiting for this exact cue. She was in her 50s, wearing a severe black overcoat, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. "Ms. Bisset," Harlan said, nodding to her. "Thank you for waiting." "Harlan," she replied, her voice as crisp as the winter air. She stepped inside, her sharp eyes taking in the entire tableau, the ruined dinner, the terrified family, the bright, angry mark on my cheek. She was, I realized, the rest of the system. Harlan was the executor. She was the law. She walked to the dining table. With a sweep of her hand, she pushed aside the congealing remnants of the feast. She placed her briefcase on the wood and clicked it open. "Arthur has informed me of the breach," she said, pulling out a thick, bound document. "We are therefore proceeding with the immediate execution of all contingencies." She looked at my father. Dale, who had been standing, shell-shocked, near the door, was now as pale as the snow outside. "Mr. Austin," Ms. Bisset said, "this is a formal notice of immediate revocation of permissive use. It requires you and your immediate family to vacate this property within 72 hours of receipt. You can't, Dale stammered, his body seeming to deflate. This is my home. No! Tanya, who had been gray and silent, suddenly found her rage again. She lunged toward the table, her eyes wild. This is illegal. You can't just throw us out. We'll sue. We will sue you for harassment. For everything. Ms. Bisset did not even flinch. She simply reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second, thinner document, sliding it across the polished wood toward Tanya. That will not be necessary. Mrs. Austin, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. This is a copy of the residential use agreement you and your husband signed 7 years ago. Upon my client's acquisition of this property, if you will kindly turn to page 4, section 2B, you will find the morals clause you both initialed. The one regarding physical violence. It is quite specific. The revocation is ironclad. Tanya stared at her own signature on the page. The trap, set 7 years ago, had just sprung. She was done. With his mother and father neutralized, Brent, the ideas guy, made his last, pathetic pivot. He turned away from the table, away from Harlan, and he looked at me. His face was a ruined, tear-streaked mess. Miranda, he pleaded, his voice a desperate whine. Mir, please, this is just a misunderstanding. It's a family argument. He scrambled for a new angle, a new leverage point. That company you have, Threadline, I read about it. It's amazing. You're a genius. We always knew that. You and me, we're the smart ones. He was trying to create a new us, a new inside. We could do business, he said, a terrible, false hope dawning in his eyes. My new venture, your logistics. We could partner. We could merge. Think of it, Mir, Austin, and Quinn, together. We keep it all in the family. We'll be unstoppable. I looked at this man, my stepbrother, who had just minutes ago sat in silence while his mother assaulted me. His venture was a fantasy built on my inheritance, a castle of air. No, Brent, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his pleading. We are not doing business. We will never be in business. I walked to the table. I picked up a linen napkin and the heavy, expensive pen Ms. Bisset had used. On the napkin, I wrote 2 things: the URL for the Ohio State Workforce Assistance website, and the name of a local community college that offered a 6-month certification in fleet logistics. I slid the napkin across the table to him. This is a list of job placement resources, I said. You want to be in business? Start here. Get a certification. Get a job. Build something real. That's how it's done. He stared at the napkin as if I had handed him a scorpion. The idea of work, of starting at the bottom, was a concept so foreign to him it was an insult. My father, having seen his wife silenced and his son humiliated, played his final card. Not anger, not denial, pity. He looked at Harlan, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Harlan, please, think of my reputation. Think of the family name. This is ruin. We can handle this. Quietly. An arrangement. We just need to save face. For the family. Please. Harlan, who had been watching this all unfold, stepped forward. His shadow fell across the table, across all of them. Face, Dale? Harlan's voice was cold. You want to talk about saving face? He raised his hand and pointed, not at Dale, but at me, at my cheek, which was now a swollen, purplish bruise under the warm cabin lights. You sat at the head of this table, Harlan said, his voice a low, controlled indictment. You sat in the chair of the patriarch, and you watched your wife strike your daughter. A guest in what you believed to be your home, you did not speak, you did not move, you did not defend your own blood. He leaned closer. Dignity is not bought with silence in the face of violence. Dale, you have no face left to save. Harlan turned away from him, his dismissal absolute. He and Ms. Bisset looked at me. The prosecution was over. This was the reorganization. Miranda, Harlan said, as I told you, I am the executor, but the trust itself is now compromised. Your father's stewardship is, as of this moment, terminated. Ms. Bisset slid a new, heavy document in front of me. I am appointing you as co-trustee of the Quinn Trust, effective immediately. Harlan continued. You will have full signatory and operational control of all assets. He held up a hand, but I have learned a hard lesson. Absolute power, even when deserved, is a flaw in any system. Your appointment comes with a new governance structure. He tapped the document. We are establishing a 3-person independent oversight committee. Ms. Bisset will chair it. They will audit all accounts quarterly. It is a system of checks and balances to protect the trust from the outside and to protect you from error. You are an engineer. You understand. I did. It wasn't a punishment. It was a firewall. It was smart. And Harlan said, Your appointment has one condition. He looked at me, a rare, almost smile touching his eyes. You spoke of your long table, of equal chairs. I approve of that philosophy. You will be required to divert 5% of the trust's annual earnings to a new foundation. We will call it the Long Table Fund. It will provide vocational scholarships for young men and women seeking careers in the trades, logistics, supply chain, the people who do the work. This was not revenge. This was rerouting. This was taking the capital they had tried to steal and diverting it to people like the girl I had been, the ones who needed to build their own exit. I accept, I said. A small, choked sound came from the corner. It was Aunt Linda. She had been a silent, terrified witness. Now, slowly, she stood up. Tanya glared at her, but Linda's eyes were on me. Miranda, she whispered. She went to a heavy antique sideboard in the corner. She fumbled with a small key, her hands shaking, and opened a locked drawer. Tanya was going to throw it out, she stammered, tears running down her face. When she redecorated, she said it was clutter. I couldn't let her. I hid it. She pulled out a heavy object, wrapped in an old soft flannel cloth. It was your mother's, she said. She loved it. She used to listen to the jazz stations on it. She placed it in my hands. I unwrapped the cloth. It was a beautiful dark wood tabletop radio from the 1940s, with heavy Bakelite knobs and a woven cloth speaker grill. It was heavy. It was real. It was the one thing in this house, besides me, that they had not managed to erase. I held it to my chest. Ms. Bisset, all business, reclaimed the room. The terms, she said. She looked at Tanya. Mrs. Austen, you have 72 hours to vacate this property with your personal belongings. Arthur will supervise the removal. Any items of value purchased since 2016 are subject to financial review. She looked at Brent. Mr. Austen, your venture, B. Austen Ventures, is a fraudulent entity funded by stolen capital. It will be dissolved by my office tomorrow morning. The leased vehicles will be seized and liquidated to repay the loan you guaranteed with forged documents. Given your profound lack of judgment, we strongly advise you to remain here, under Arthur's supervision, to assist your mother in packing. It is time you took responsibility for your own logistics. Brent just wept. Finally, she looked at my father. Dale, a full repayment plan for the $175,000 taken from the trust, plus market rate interest, has been drafted. It will be collateralized against your primary residence, your vehicles, and your retirement accounts. You will make quarterly payments for the rest of your life. You will sign it, tonight. Dale looked up, his face broken. He looked past the lawyer, past Harlan, to me. His eyes were desperate. Miranda, he whispered. I am so sorry. The word I had waited to hear my entire childhood, the word I had screamed in my head in the garage. Sorry. And now, hearing it, I felt nothing. It was just a sound. It was a last, desperate attempt to reestablish an emotional connection, a debt I could forgive. I don't want your apology, Dad, I said. my voice flat, holding my mother's radio. An apology is just a word. It's an attempt to wipe the slate clean. I'm not wiping the slate. I'm balancing the books. I looked at Ms. Bisset. I don't need sorry. I need governance. I need signed papers. I need behavioral constraints. Harlan Quinn nodded once, satisfied. Dignity, Dale, he said, his voice quiet, is the only asset you can't inherit. You have to build it yourself, and you, it seems, are leveraged to the hilt. The fire in the hearth was finally dying. The room was growing cold. The explosive heat of the confrontation was gone, replaced by the cold, sterile air of legal execution. Ms. Bisset placed the repayment agreement in front of Dale. Sign here. He signed. She placed the trust transfer and the terms of the long table fund in front of me. Sign here. I signed. She placed the notice of revocation and receipt of terms in front of Tanya. Sign here. Tanya's hand was shaking so violently she could barely hold the pen. She signed. I did not move. I did not celebrate. I stood there, holding my mother's heavy radio, and I watched them sign every single paper. The fire guttered, casting long shadows. The system was corrected. The accounts were closed. No more, and no less. The last signature dried on the last page. Ms. Bisset. Her work concluded, gathered the stack of signed agreements, the revocation, the repayment plan, the trust transfer, and sealed them in her briefcase with a final, definitive click. The cabin, which only moments ago had felt like the inside of a furnace, was suddenly profoundly cold. The fire, which had been our audience, had collapsed in on itself, a dying core of embers in the stone hearth. Harlan Quinn stood up. He walked to the chair by the door where his heavy wool overcoat lay folded. He lifted it, the dark fabric seeming to absorb the room's remaining warmth, and settled it onto his straight shoulders. He did not button it. He was not finished. This was not a departure. It was a pivot. He reached into his inner pocket, but he did not retrieve his gloves. He pulled out a single, heavy, industrial-grade key, attached to a plain, stamped brass tag. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me, where I stood by the hearth, my mother's radio held in my arms. There is one final asset, Miranda, he said, his voice cutting through the funereal silence. I took an interest in your work in Colorado, a few years ago. I saw what you were building. I read the articles. Threadline flow. He paused. It was an intelligent system, and intelligent systems deserve the infrastructure to grow. He held up the key. The light from the dying fire glinted on the brass tag. It was stamped, Denver, Dock 5. I acquired a property, he said, a 30,000-square-foot warehouse, near the new rail spur, about 3 miles from your current office. I bought it quietly, through a holding company. I wasn't sure of its purpose. I only knew that I recognized the work. It was your mother's mind, building in steel and code. He walked over to me and placed the heavy, cold key into my free hand. It felt impossibly heavy. This warehouse is now yours, he said. Or rather, it belongs to the trust. It will be the headquarters for the new Long Table Fund. It will be the Long Table Center, a place for free vocational training, logistics, coding, supply chain management, for anyone who wants to learn the work, for anyone who wants to build their own way out. He nodded toward the papers Ms. Bisset was holding. That is the true condition of your co-trusteeship. The majority of the Quinn Trust assets will not go to you. They will go to this, to the center. You will be its director, its steward. His eyes, my mother's eyes, held mine. You are the keeper of the fire, Miranda, not the owner of the gold. I was speechless. A warehouse, a center, a foundation. But, Harlan, I managed. It is already in motion, he said, anticipating my question. The legal framework is complete. The plaque for the front door was engraved last week. He paused, and his voice, for the first time, held a note of profound, settled satisfaction. It bears your mother's name, the Catherine Quinn Center for Applied Logistics. My mother's name, not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as a foundation. A choked, strangled sound came from the table. It was my father. He looked up, his face a ruin of disbelief and pathetic rage. "You can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You can't. Her name? On her company? That's not right. It's punitive. It's a monument to this." He waved a trembling hand at the ruined dinner. He still saw the world through a lens of trophies and punishments. I turned to him. The anger I had held for so long was gone. The cold precision of the engineer was gone. All I felt was a vast, clear distance. "This isn't a trophy, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "And it's not a punishment. It's not a prize. It's a commitment. It's the work. It's what she would have done if she'd had the time." Harlan gave me a brief, sharp nod of approval. He turned his gaze one last time, to Tanya. She was sitting in her chair, shrunken, her new jewelry looking like cheap, gaudy plastic. She was staring at her own hands, the hands that had struck me, as if they belonged to someone else. "You," Harlan said, his voice flat. "You were right about one thing. I am a bitter old man. I am bitter about waste. I am bitter about cruelty. And I am bitter about cowards who use violence to maintain a broken system." He looked at the mark on my face, now a deep, swollen purple. "Violence does not win in this house, Mrs. Austin, not while I am drawing breath." He had passed his judgment. I looked at the three of them, the ruined system, Dale, the failed patriarch, Tanya, the deposed tyrant, Brent, the broken heir. I thought of the new warehouse. I thought of the long table. "The opening for the center is in 3 months," I said. They all looked up, startled, as if a ghost had spoken. "I am inviting you both," I looked at Dale, then at Brent. "To Denver, to the opening." Brent's tear-streaked face was a mask of confusion. "Why?" he mumbled. "Why would you—" "Because you need to see what a real table looks like," I said. 10 seats, all identical, no head of the table, no foot, and no low, comfortable stool by the fire. Brent stared at me. The bravado was gone. The sneering, unearned confidence had evaporated. He looked at the floor, at his father, at his mother, and then at me, the woman he had watched his mother strike, and for the first time in his entire, pampered life, a wave of real, profound shame hit him. It broke him. He buried his face in his hands and began to cry. Not the wheezing sobs of a child denied a toy, but the hard, racking, agonizing sobs of an adult forced to see his own profound worthlessness. I'm sorry. Mir," he choked out, the words muffled by his hands. I just sat there. I'm sorry. You're better than I ever thought." I didn't accept the apology. It wasn't mine to accept. It was just a fact. At that table, "Brent," I said, "it is either everyone or it is no one. That's the only rule. You are invited. But you will have to choose to come. And if you do, you will sit at the same height as everyone else." Harlan Quinn walked to the fireplace. The once roaring inferno was now a dull, graying pile of embers. He took the heavy iron poker from its stand and stirred the coals one last time, sending a final, brief shower of sparks up the chimney. Then he took the heavy iron fire screen, the one meant to keep the fire contained, and he laid it flat across the entire opening, cutting off the air. He was extinguishing it. "We are finished here," he said, his back to the broken family. "Tonight, we use this fire to see the truth. From tomorrow, we will use the lights in a warehouse to show the way." The cabin in Ohio dissolved. The smell of wood smoke and old resentments faded, replaced by the clean, cold scent of the high desert, of concrete dust and new paint. I was in Denver. I stood in the bright, thin, morning air, in front of 2 massive, corrugated steel doors. In my hand, I held the heavy brass key. I slid it into the industrial lock. It was stiff, the metal new, I turned it. The thud of the locking mechanism releasing was loud in the quiet morning. I put my shoulder to the heavy door and pushed. It rolled open on its track, its groan a low, mechanical promise, and let a perfect, sharp blade of Colorado sunlight cut into the darkness. I stepped inside. "Lights," I said to the empty air. One by one, the long banks of high bay LED lights hummed to life, a cascading wave of white light that chased the shadows back, illuminating a vast, cavernous, and perfectly empty space. The polished concrete floor shone. And in the exact center, exactly where I had instructed the riggers to place it, was my 10-seat table. The scarred pine top looked small but infinitely solid, anchored in the middle of that enormous potential. I walked to the far wall, where a simple set of metal shelves had been installed. From my bag, I took the heavy, Bakelite radio, my mother's radio. I placed it on the top shelf. I turned the heavy, black knob. There was a quiet crackle, a hiss of static, and then the clear, complex, and intelligent notes of a jazz piano filled the massive, echoing space. I heard a sound from outside, the distant, rhythmic beep of a forklift backing up from the rail spur, the sound of work, the sound of systems in motion. The wide warehouse door was still open. The sunlight flooded in, and they began to arrive. Not investors, not executives. A young woman in a trucker hat, her application folded in her hand. A man in his 40s, his work boots scuffed, his hands rough from a lifetime of labor he wanted to change. A group of recent immigrants, pointed here by a community center, their eyes bright and eager to learn a new code. They were the people who had been left out of the frame, the ones assigned to the margins, the ones told to keep it down so they wouldn't make someone else feel bad. They looked at the table, intimidated by the space. I gestured. "Please," I said. "Sit." One by one, they walked in from the bright light, out of the cold, and they took their seats, all of them, at the same height. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. Where in the world are you listening from? Please drop a comment below and share your own reflections. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories and like this video, and you can support us even more by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by everyone who needs it.